I would like to welcome everyone to the Roxborough Roundtables. My name is Jessica Putman, and I am the student coordinator for the tables. Today our topic is 9/11 and conspiracy theories, and our host today will be Evan Lee.
Hello everybody, we have a very nice outcome. Thank you for coming. Today we're going to discuss two separate items. First we're going to talk about how 9/11 has changed America in the ways it affects us every day in our functions and our civil rights. And the next thing we'll discuss after that will be 9/11 conspiracy theories, which get to the heart of who really caused the tragedies themselves. I have taken a personal interest in this. I'm a New Yorker. I took personal offense to this. It was my city. I saw my city injured that day. I remember watching the television like everyone else and watching the towers come down over and over and over again. I remember how the press was saying what would be next. I was particularly traumatized about they were zooming in. I remember they brought the press to the Empire State Building, which is New York. I mean, World Trade Center is cool, but Empire State Building is New York. And they said, we think it's the next thing to go. And it was just a very terrifying moment for everyone I know. I also had my best friend who that day worked. Luckily, I was very lucky because I thought he worked in Wall Street. He was the vice president of New York Stock Exchange, so I figured he worked in Wall Street. But actually, his office was in World Trade Center Tower number 2. I luckily didn't know that he was there that day until later when he was safe. But I've since spoken to him, and he told me that he got out of the subway that day, and he looked up and he saw a fire in the first tower, and he's one of the brightest people I know, and he said he was frozen by what he saw. I mean, you don't see that usually, but he didn't understand what was going on, and everyone's just staring up, and then he saw a huge airplane just smash right into his building, and he saw the explosion, he saw the flames, he saw the people falling out. He saw terrible things that day, and he's one of the closest people to me, and him suffering through that made this a very personal thing to me, being a New Yorker and having friends, and he lost a lot of friends that day as well. I really do believe that 9/11 changed us in many ways, and what I'd like to do is explore around the table first before we get into the conspiracy theory part. Why don't you introduce, Jesse, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us your major, and we'll just go around the table and then we'll get into questions.
Okay. I'm Jessica Putman. I am a senior with a Law Society major, minor in psychology.
Kevin Pierre-Louis. I'm a third-year Law and Society with a minor in engineering.
Dylan Gormley, third year, Law and Society, minor in philosophy.
David Rogers, assistant professor of writing and rhetoric.
Roger Barnacle, assistant professor of international relations.
I want to start with the students because I know it was some time ago, so I'm not going to limit just to your impressions, but maybe your family and your parents, grandparents, whatever it may be. When I say 9/11, Jesse, is there anything you visualize or anything that comes to mind?
When I see 9/11, when I hear 9/11, a lot of the things like I think of is like the pictures of the towers and like the pictures of people like jumping out of the building and things like that, because that's like what I was taught. But that's about it.
Okay.
I automatically think of paranoia and the fear that came afterwards, that something like that would happen again.
Every time I hear Dylan, sorry. Every time it's brought up, the first thing that comes to my mind, I was in third grade, and I remember it being played, like, the teacher brought it up on the TV, and I remember seeing the first, actually it was probably both towers, I can't really remember, but I remember seeing the smoke just billowing out, and she was weeping and it was really weird thing because we didn't know what was going on, and I remember getting out early that day, and it was also, I don't know if you guys remember this, but a beautiful day that day. I mean, it was so surreal. Just looking back at the whole thing, it just to this day kind of weirds me out.
David?
I think I would piggyback off of Kevin and the kind of fear that surrounded the event, but also the ways in which different institutions, including the government, used fear as a mechanism for enacting lots of legislation, and how that also filtered into other media, how films changed. We saw the reemergence of the superhero and the super citizen. We saw the emergence of and the embodiment of, by our own president, the cowboy narrative, once again, as a way of protecting and rescuing the nation from evil, divisive language, where we got pitched as a story circulated. It's just so black and white. It's good versus evil, when nothing's that simple. But it was persuasive because people were scared.
It's really weird, the 7, and especially for me, it's so strange. We all walked around with little American flag pins afterwards. And I would, if you would have told me that I would walk around with an American flag pin, I would say, you're out of your mind, okay? I'll leave the middle part out. That's just so not me. But boy, I was walking around with my American flag pin, and I remember, it's so strange, I was at the dealership getting my car fixed, and I would never, ever talk to anyone. God forbid you should have conversation with people. But we sat next to each other. I remember talking about America, with each other, and how proud we are to be Americans. It was really bizarre. I know I was acting really weird, and that's what your parents, and you were putting flags on their cars and all this strange stuff, and singing these like "I'm proud to be an American," all those kind of songs that came out, the cheesy songs, right. And that was the feeling. I guarantee you, all your parents here were walking around, most of you, with flags or whatever it may be. It was that kind of time. Professor Paracal, any thoughts?
Yeah, when 9/11 happened, I had not moved to the United States. I was still in my home country of India. I was actually getting ready to move here, and as an international relations professor, I knew that this is going to change the world. It's definitely going to change the United States. My big question was, why? Why did this happen? Who is much easier to figure out than the why? And there are many answers. I don't think there's one answer for that, but I think we can have a discussion of that.
And I'll just take issue with one thing. I think the who is still being debated. There are people who, we'll get into the conspiracy theory, but that gets a little bit offline for a second. You were talking about fear, and you were talking, Dylan, about fear, and so was Dave. And I just want to throw some stats at you, and maybe you guys can help me out. And this is not putting it. 3,000 Americans died that day, and that's pretty awful. But 250,000 people die every year of tobacco. 212 people die every year of obesity-related diseases like diabetes and so forth. Medical errors, doctors messing up, 150,000 a year. Alcohol without driving causes 70,000 deaths. Drunk driving causes 23,000. Guns cost 30,000 to 40,000 lives a year. Why is it that we don't really seem to care much about this? We tolerate, but 3,000 people died that day, and all of a sudden, everything changes.
It's because of the narrative. Because we can construct this as a good guys and bad guys situation. Because in that situation, it is somebody else enacting violence upon us. Because it brings us together in that sense of nationalism that you said that you found afterwards. Because we could come together against a common enemy. Whereas something like tobacco is a choice that we as Americans make by the millions every year.
Mm-hmm. How about you?
I have to agree with that completely. The deaths that you just rattled off, none of us see that. None of us really, some of us might have family members or friends that have something related to that. But that's on a very individual level. 9/11, I was in 3rd grade, and that image of those towers is burned in the back of my eyelids. Every time I think about that, any time, that image, clear as day, comes up. Because it was just, everyone was brought into it.
We have a big crowd here. You can't see that on radio. But who here remembers seeing the buildings? Just raise your hand here. Okay, we have tons of hands. Sean de Blasio, you knew you weren't going to get away without talking. So just talk loud. Sean, what do you remember about it?
I remember seeing the burning buildings, all the flames coming out, the orange with the red, the smoke with the helicopters circling the buildings, all the newscasters, people down on the ground just staring up at the buildings, the firefighters watching the second plane hit the building. All those things that you see in the media constantly, those are ingrained in my brain.
Is it something traumatic when you think about it? Something that brings stress?
Like, yeah, whenever, like on September 11th, whenever that day comes around, as in tomorrow, yeah, I'll get chills. I'll take a moment just to remember.
Who else? We had another hands. Raise your hands again. Who saw the planes? I think you raised your hand. What's your name?
Anna Marie.
So what do you remember, Anna Marie?
I remember I was in kindergarten and my mom picked me up from school that day, and I can just remember like vividly like being in my family room with her, like watching it on the TV, and like I was young so I didn't like fully get it, but like I could tell my mom was upset, and I can like remember that image very clearly.
And your mom being upset is something that stays in your mind because, you know, that's who's closer to you.
Mm-hmm.
Who else? Raise your hands. Young lady there, give me your name and say loud.
My name's Samantha, and I was in first grade at the time, and I remember my mom worked at City Hall at the time in Philadelphia, and my neighbor actually picked me up from school, and then my dad went over to my neighbor's house, and I remember my dad in their kitchen screaming into the phone at the operators because they had cut City Hall's phone lines, and though we were in a different city, it was still scary, and we didn't know what was going on with Center City, and I remember my mom not returning home that night until almost 11:30 at night, and I didn't really know what was going on, but it was like a lot of anxiety in my house, and it was like chaotic.
I can sense it in my voice and everyone else's voices, and tell me if I'm right or wrong. If you think about 9/11, and you guys were still young, does it bring up stress? Is this something... We see nodding, so you got to say yes for the radio. Okay, so the question is why? Go ahead.
Can we pause for a second
ahead.
and like tease out the implications of the story, right? Because I think that, like, if we think about it as a story, which I think is important because it keeps getting retold, both in fiction and film and nonfiction, but it's kind of important, right? It's important that it's New York. You already expressed how important New York is to you, but it is important that it's the World Trade Center. Those are symbolic for commerce, right? For world exchange. I mean, that was taken down, and they were huge, right? I mean, if we want to take it even further and kind of like go back to your high school, they're phallic symbols of power, right? They are. They're these huge.
Let the radio reflect.
It's a literary term. I'm not making this up. Thank Freud. But it all touches on these nerves that we already have familiarity with, because even at a young age when we get told stories, these are all those components, right? We have actors or characters. Things are being done to someone else. You have often a conflict, right? And we pitch it, or some pitch it as good versus evil, etc. I'm done. I think it's important to tease out that as part of its like emotional affect that persists.
As an extension of that, Kevin, you have to like consider the shift in the media afterwards. Before that we were making all of these dark comedies and dramas, and after 9/11 there was a shift towards heroism, and all of our stories now are about these big dramatic heroes facing adversity, like at the worst and the darkest of times. That's not something that just happened. That's a direct result of 9/11. And that's why those movies don't succeed as well abroad with people who haven't experienced the same trauma that we did.
That's an interesting point. Alex, you want to say something?
Yeah, my name's Alex. I think it was a huge blow to the world general, like to the whole United States, not just one city. But it impacted lives, not only the victims, but also other people as well, like the firefighters, policemen, and people who decided to join the service. That was a big impact. My brother joined the service after 9/11. My uncle did as well, and I joined the service when I graduated from high school.
Would you say because of 9/11?
Yeah, because of the war, how it started and how everything. So I decided to join, and
So that goes into the question I was asking before. Why does it bring up such emotion in us? What was so powerful about those images? What was so upsetting about those images? Go ahead.
My name's Nicole, and I just sort of agree with that. I feel like it was the amount of trauma all crammed into one day that sort of made everyone feel more emotion about it, and that kind of where you bring back like the statistics, how you say all of that is in within 1 year, whereas this was in 1 day. It sort of made everyone realize like all the different lessons and stuff that were taught. We can still use that today because of like how all the heroes and the firefighters and the first
Right.
responders responded to everything, and we can sort of use this day as like a lesson. And it really like just because we had all of the trauma and all of that really helped us to like, I don't know how to bring this together. Like it's sort of I don't know, all the like the traumaticness sort of kept us united as a country, and that sort of is easier to think about when it's all 1 day than over like the span of a year where you're not really realizing it. So.
You're over there.
My name's Gianna. I just want to say that, like, I feel like it's that traumatizing because it could have been anybody. It wasn't targeted specifically at one group of community people, like within a domestic situation. It was international. It could have been anybody. So part of the reason why this country was so united of it, like around it, was because it was really just unknown. You know, it wasn't just the World Trade Center, it was the Pentagon. It was like they were going to target the White House. And like my aunt and uncle were going to tour the White House that day. So they were put on lockdown in their hotel. And the fact that I feel that we as humans are afraid of the unknown. We like control, we like to know what's happening. And this entire occasion was a demonstration that we didn't have that.
I think that's an excellent point, because the Americans think we're safe. We spend more than every other country in the world. You take every other country in the world and add them all together, and we still spend more than all of them in our armies, navies, and military. We have never supposedly lost a war. We've got 2 huge oceans on either side, and we feel safe. And I think what you're saying is that day, we didn't feel, all of a sudden, we didn't feel safe anymore. You're shaking, you agree?
I agree.
It's, go ahead.
I think the importance that it was on American soil
Yeah.
also changes the conversation. America's, for a very long time, other than Pearl Harbor, correct me if I'm wrong, in the Civil War.
And the War of 1812.
Yeah.
Which no one knows about, but that's...
Yeah.
Okay.
But there hasn't been the same kinds of violence that we've witnessed in other kinds of ways, especially in the 20th century with World War I and World War II. At the same magnitude, even though it was much more in World War I and World War II, but it wasn't on our soil. We could distance ourselves, and in this case, I'm collectivizing this, assuming a lot of things, but many Americans could distance themselves from certain forms of violence, but when it's done right on your soil, it changes the narrative, I think.
It changed the narrative to we were safe before, to we're not safe anymore. Yeah. Alex.
It's like you put a number out there, 3,000 victims. I think the number still continues to this day because of the war. You know how it impacted. It was like something that sparked and ignited and just went with it. You know, we invaded so many countries over that.
The Afghanistan war, the Iraq war.
Yeah, how it continues today. You know, how so many things are going on that people really don't know. Like, as we're sitting here, there's people getting shot at right now and still dying to this day. Like, yeah, you don't hear about it in the news, that doesn't mean anything.
I think that's super smart and coincides with what I'm saying, because that's abroad, right? That's not on our soil. We don't have to interact with it in the same ways, right? Except through various other forms of representation.
I'd say that just as much as the geography of the attack, the rhetoric that we used afterwards is like probably just as essential. The fact that it was kept as this focal point for the next 10 years, like the last 14 years of foreign policy. This has been our focal point. It's been driving the way that America communicates with the rest of the world. We're never going to forget 9/11 because 9/11 is essential too.
And it also has affected our everyday. You guys don't know what it's like to go to an airport and actually meet your grandparents at the gate.
Right.
You used to be able to do that. I'm not talking about the gate outside where you're running with the car and the cops are throwing, saying, get out, and your older relatives are coming up, and it's all this terrible tension at the airport. It used to be you'd go to the gate and they came out of the door and you say, hi, Grandma, hi, Grandpa, and you go over and kiss them. You can't do that anymore. If you have to stay outside. It used to be I can go to an Eagles game and not get sexually assaulted by the security guards when you went in, and yet it's okay. It used to be that I can go to an airport. Thank you. It used to be that I could go to an airport and not have to get undressed in front of everybody because for whatever reason I'd look like a terrorist that day. That didn't exist.
Yeah.
I hope you don't know that because you weren't around then. Yeah, Jesse.
And then just touching on that, it has a lot to do with like Muslim Americans and the things that they have to go through now. Like the simplest things for a Muslim, like wearing their garbs, is all of a sudden like such a big threat to every American. But it's like, well, not every American. Some people don't care, but to most Americans, it's seen as like they're terrorists. And like every time something's done by anybody from that even associates themselves with the Muslim religion, it's automatically terrorism. Versus anyone else who does something in the name of their religion, it's kind of just like that one isolated incident.
Alex?
Yeah, she was saying about the Muslims, but it's anyone that even looks like from the Middle East or anything, like that's ridiculous. Even that would happen. That happened even came with hate. Like people start feeling a certain way towards people that are from different countries or from the Middle East or some that look or that I just didn't understand that. Like even being in the service and people deploy, you go over there and you do whatever it is you do, but you shouldn't hate anyone just for what someone else did. They had no part of it.
I mean, just yesterday, a guy who's a Sikh, which is not Muslim, but that just shows just how smart we are sometimes. They wear the turbans. Was beat up very badly. It was in the newspaper, and the people who were beating him up were saying, "Take this, Osama bin Laden." And even till this day, that America has changed. We have had a lot of hate. Go on. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Say your name.
I'm Vivian. But I think what Alex said earlier, it really does have to do with like one incident will cause everyone to look at a certain race differently. It also connects to Pearl Harbor, since after that, even American Japanese people were took from their homes, from their jobs, from their lives, and ejected into like concentration camps, and we were keeping an eye on them the whole time. And same thing happened after 9/11. Everyone just looked at anyone who looked remotely Middle Eastern, even though someone might not have said it, they would think in their head like they'd be a little suspicious, and that kind of ramifications carried out, like still going on today and happened before. So.
And we're talking about how America changed as a result of 9/11. I started out with that we became patriotic, but now we're talking about a really much darker side, which you're saying is that the paranoia, the hate machine started. Muslims or anyone who was dark was looked at as suspicious or looked at as evil or difficult.
Well, can't those both be? Don't those two things occur simultaneously most of the time? To find pride in ourselves is to find distaste for the other, and we have to, in order to collectivize ourselves, we have to first of all decide who the other is.
That's a good point. You have something to say?
My name is Lenny. I feel like it's like there's almost this like race to clean out anybody bad, and so it goes back to the good versus evil. And so when you go into the airport and you go through TSA, like it's not just the Middle Easterners or anybody whose name is like, it's not Bob, Joe, Sarah. You'll get stopped, and every time they're like, no, it's random. Your hands are swiped down to make sure there's nothing, like there's no lotion. Your hair is patted down. And so I think that at first it was patriotic, and now we've moved so progressively that it's cleaning out a race so that everyone's pure, so to speak.
Right.
Yes.
My name is Anna. I saw a very small part of this. My grandfather is Syrian, and although I don't look Middle Eastern at all, I was checking out with my dad, and a lady saw our last name, which is Arabic, and she asked what race it was. And I don't remember what she said, but she said along the lines of like bombs and terrorists and stuff. And this was just at like Macy's over Christmas. So.
Wow.
Hi, I'm Casey, and I just want to talk about like the same portrayal of Muslim Americans, like how it's affected like the media and like television shows and movies. Like every time there's a bad guy, it's a Muslim American, or like they're just like always seen as the bad people in like Criminal Minds, like movies. Captain America became like a huge like reinvention kind of with Chris Evans, like because of showed the patriotism and the nationalism, and I think that's why it strikes a core with all of us, because that underlying all of our emotions is our patriotism for America. Like I just find that really affects it.
I think
Bond
it's
used to fight the Russians and the Germans.
Exactly.
Now Bond
Yeah.
is fighting-
I think it's really interesting that we've moved actually from this like the tail end of the Second Red Scare and like McCarthyism, and now we're in this place where it's like it's entirely directed towards an entirely different group of people, and how the nationalism and the narrative hasn't shifted at all, but the target has.
always shifts. Yeah. Go, Alex.
I think it's not only is it about like race or a certain person who looks a certain way, but I think it also has to do with they're blaming a lot on a religion. Like they think that the Muslim religion or whatever different kind of religion it is so bad. It's not. It's not the religion. It's some people that are in it. You know, it can be any religion. That's another thing that comes into play. Oh, that religion's this or this is that. Or people from middle. That's a lie. It's just.
So we have changed. Go ahead.
Just piggybacking off
Your name.
Vivian. Piggybacking off what Alex said, he's definitely right about the whole religion thing. Every religion has extreme zealots and then people who just believe in the religion, pray, and are like that. There's people like that in the Christian community and the Catholic community against gays, and so much hate against them, and it's just the extremes of the religion. Not everyone who is Christian or Catholic feels that way about a certain group of people. It's just like there's a spectrum of people within a religion.
Timothy McVeigh, who was white and Christian, bombed the federal courthouse and killed many people, including a lot of children. Was he called a terrorist?
No.
Or a lunatic?
Well, because
he was white and Christian, he was called a lunatic.
This fits right back into the idea of a narrative, because we have to look at who is the main character of the American narrative. And the main character of the American narrative is a white Protestant man. The KKK is an active white Christian terrorist group, but it will never be referred to as such because it fits very comfortably into the main character of the American narrative, of our exceptionalism or whatever.
Sean?
Oh, no, I have nothing.
Oh, okay. Sean has nothing to say. Okay. What we're seeing, just to sum up, is that there was this huge backlash as a result of 9/11. And you may argue it changed us or just redirected us. And we're always the same, whether it was the Japanese, as you pointed out, the communists, the Jews, it's always the Jews. And the blacks, it's always the blacks. And now became the Muslims. And we always seem to have a target. But that was, I think, a large change in our society. Another one I want to discuss is there was a time when all your phone calls weren't being listened to. We have lost a tremendous amount of our civil rights in this country. And no one seems to even know or seem to care about that, all in the name of national security. And I want to know from you guys, just how comfortable are you being watched all the time? There's cameras everywhere now. Your phone calls are being listened to, you're being watched everywhere you go, and the answer for that is national security. The spending for national security went from several billion to $60 billion as a result of all this. Tremendous sums are being spent, never mind the military, watching you. How comfortable are you with this?
My name's Sophia. It definitely does scare me a lot in the fact that, I don't know if you guys have read Big Brother, but like it kind of reflects on that, as in like there's this bigger power watching your every move and kind of controlling what you do. And it kind of scares me in the fact that I don't know if they took advantage of this situation and are decreasing our power essentially and our rights for the right means anymore. I think that it started off as a good plan, and now it's just the fact that they just keep increasing, taking them away, not necessarily for like our best interests.
And the justification is always that it's effective and it's productive, even when we consider things like advanced interrogation methods, which is just torture.
We'll be getting to that soon, I promise.
Well, the justification is always that it is productive and effective, when in many cases it isn't. The amount of surveillance that we have isn't producing what it should be. So it's not really a matter of security versus privacy. It's we are losing our privacy and not being given security in return.
Right,
we're losing both.
Bombers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They still got away with it. Okay.
I think it plays a big role. Social media also plays a big role in this situation. Like whatever you guys post on Facebook or other Instagram, whatever it is. I have a buddy who, when I was in the service with, he works for like the FBI. That's what some of the stuff he does. No, seriously, all he does is there's like certain computers, and you go through and whatever red lot, like whatever comes up red is something that someone put on Facebook like stupid. Then they look where their address is, look where everything's at, all about them, and they're like, all right, this is what's going on. All right, nothing. It was just a joke. Next person, they kick them off Facebook or whatever it is, or kick them off Instagram. It's crazy. It is. And now they're thinking about that stuff with the car. I don't know if anyone's heard about that, but it's like miles. They're going to start like kind of like accountability where your vehicle's at all times. Supposedly they're doing it for crime or like the murder rates and all that, but it's really not. It's just to know where you're at all times. Like they want to know what it is, or they listen to your phones. They tap your phones, anything. It's like a system that goes into your phone. Like anything comes up, if they hear anything, then they start listening to your call. It's it's crazy that you want freedom. This is supposed to be freedom, all this stuff, liberty. Really, it's not. It's crazy how it is, and they're doing this all for security. And it's really not security; it's for their own benefit. We're gaining nothing by this. What have we gained? What security have we got?
Allison, your name over there again? Sophia bring a very good point, and I wanted to further with Sophia for a second because you're saying they're using it. When you're saying they're using it for other means, who are you referring to, basically,
like the government and like the people who ultimately are supposed to be benefiting us, working for the people who we elect, and which in many times is like our fault for like electing those people who aren't necessarily working in our best interest and are taking things away from us that aren't necessarily benefiting us.
They're using our fear to make them more powerful.
Right, absolutely. And they're using the excuse of, this is for the people, this is to make our country safe, but at the end of the day, like, is it really? Like, is it or is it like more about the money, more about the power? Because you hear of all these scams, and it's scary that these people have that much power.
Sophie, you definitely have to take law and society classes. Advertise here. Who had a question over here?
Yeah. I'm Brian, architecture major. I find it very scary that all this happens, knowing about like communist regimes. They would monitor everything people would do with your mail, your phone calls, everything. And we see like that kind of regime as this evil source in the world. And we're doing the same thing ourselves. But being part of a generation that has grown up with 9/11 in our distant past, so many of us are used to this. Like, we know every click we do on the internet is monitored, every call we make, every text. So a lot of us, I feel like, just don't even think about it. We're so used to it. We know that it's going to be monitored, and we feel like we're not doing anything wrong, we'll be fine. But at the same time, there's just not enough thought given to it.
Going off the last two statements, the whole thing that scares me about them being able to watch and track everything we do is the simple fact that people hack into computers all the time. Like, they just hacked into a website that pretty much told everyone who cheated on their wife. Yeah, that whole thing. And it's so, like, there's no telling that they can't easily just hack into the government, locate where you are, and like. So basically, anyone can hack into these systems, find you, locate you, and use that information however they find fit. Unfortunately, we have ran out of time, and we was not able to reach conspiracy theories. Hopefully, we can do it another day. I want to thank everyone for coming out and being part of this Roxborough Roundtable. Please come again to future roundtables. Thank you.